The Persephone Foundation. Timeline Archives. Timeline designation 2016-002. Make Europe Great Again. Trump loses the 2016 election, but barely. He claims that the election was rigged. But rather than asking for a recount or starting a civil war, Trump instead asks his supporters to follow him to Eastern Europe, where they can make Europe great again. The Visegrad Pact nations have become rather popular among the alt-right, due to their anti-migrant traditionalist stances. So the movement has a lot of people supporting it. It is eventually followed by more lukewarm Trump supporters, or even anti-Trump conservatives and independents, who just hate Clinton that much. And as more scandals erupt during the early years of the Clinton presidency, more people leave for Eastern Europe, particularly Poland and Hungary. This exodus then grows to involve millionaires, business leaders, and military men. Entire companies move to these countries as well. Surprisingly, the Eastern European governments welcome them. Probably has to do with the billions of dollars they were bringing into those countries. European controversies such as the independence of Scotland and Northern Ireland, the continuing migrant crisis, financial disasters, and the like lead the Visegrad nations to vote to leave the EU. Other Eastern European states with large American expat communities also leave. Ironically, this allows the EU to federalize further, as those states most in opposition to the EU are now gone and have no power to oppose them from within. The Eastern Europeans come closer to Russia, which itself has taken advantage of this chaos to expand its power and go in a more nationalist direction. Eastern European culture becomes a fusion of traditional culture and American conservative culture. There is a definite ethnocentrism and pro-Christian sentiment to these countries, but ironically, American culture has pushed them further from their old cultures. English has now become a dominant language across Eastern Europe, with signs in both the native language and English. Protestantism has become a major minority religion. Political divisions arose between the Americans and the locals. Rhetoric about the unity of Western civilization quickly going out the window. Trump formed his own media network, appropriately named Trump TV, and figures such as Milo Yiannopoulos and Stefan Molyneux getting their own shows on the network. InfoWars also moves and becomes a major news network in the East. A new Cold War has descended upon the world. Ironically, this time the West is more left-wing, and the East more right-wing. Nationalism and Putin-style strongman leadership has become popular throughout the Eastern Bloc, while neoliberal policies, with some bones thrown to the social justice movement, become the norm in the West. Both sides censor their media to prevent the other side from infiltrating their population. Funnily enough, 4chan was purchased by Martin Shkreli, and its servers moved to the East, where they were eventually banned from the EU and the United States for spreading hate speech. The East has done the same to Tumblr, Facebook, and Twitter, with Russian social media replacing them. India has joined the Russian side, mostly due to the rise of anti-Islamic, pro-Hindu, and pro-nationalist sentiment in India. Egypt's government was overthrown in November, leading to another civil war, with a military junta triumphing and tearing apart any agreements it had with the Americans. The new Egyptian regime is also capitalizing on anti-Israeli sentiment. Camp David is now a thing of the past. The Chinese Communist Party is taken down after Xi Jinping tries to go after top rivals in the party. A brief power struggle ensues, with lots of Communist Party members being jailed. To the surprise of everybody, Xi says the CCP is corrupt because of systemic problems, and breaks it up into many different parties. The People's Republic of China is no longer an officially communist state. However, Xi Jinping remains the core leader of China, and for all intents and purposes, China is still a dictatorship. Internally, China is non-ideological, adopting and dropping policies based on whatever is good for the Chinese dream. China has formed its own third bloc. It never really made up with Russia, and relations with America were destroyed thanks to the dispute over the South China Sea. The Chinese Third Way is anti-ideological, with both nationalist Brazil and left-wing South Africa being strong Chinese allies. Now that Xi Jinping has recently died, his successor tries to continue China's rise. Points of interest. The Canadians were rather pleased that Trump called for an exodus to Eastern Europe, and that the trope of Americans claiming that they would move to Canada if their candidate lost has ended. Not that they had much to fear with Trump supporters moving to Canada, since it was further left than the United States. Cuba gradually became an American ally, as relations between the two countries improved. Ironically, their relations with Russia degraded as Russia moved further to the right. Venezuela's ruling socialist government was thrown out democratically, and a more moderate government took its place, one friendlier to Brazil. Northern Ireland and Scotland eventually did vote to leave the United Kingdom to rejoin the European Union. Ironically, they have opposed joining the full European Union, opting to retain their sovereignty. The remaining United Kingdom has, naturally, turned to the polls. It has also become a major destination for the American diaspora, which has allowed parties such as UKIP to become very powerful in the UK. UKIP is considering a name change, since its goal had been achieved 20 years ago. Norway's government became far more conservative after observing what happened to Sweden, which is the furthest left of the European Union core member states and is having lots of problems regarding its creaking welfare state and major cultural clashes and rioting in its major cities. Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia are all very anti-Russian powers, but are friendly to Poland and the other new right states. Ukraine's flirtation with joining the EU ended rather quickly, when the Russians moved in during the chaos of the 2020s. American expats also took up arms, mostly on behalf of the Russians. Serbs are getting rather annoyed with American expats shouting, "Remove kebab," at them. Turkey is an outer EU member, something which the Eastern Europeans claim is proof that the EU is out to destroy European civilization. Assad triumphed, as the chaos of the 2016 election and its aftermath stopped the Americans from intervening as the Russians moved in more ground and air forces to prop up the Assad regime. Modern Syria is secular, if still authoritarian, and ISIS is just a bad memory. They do still have problems with the Kurdish People's Republic. Israel is concerned about the rise of anti-Semitism in both the East and the West. In the East, anti-Semitism takes a more blatant neo-Nazi form, although enough politicians in the East back Israel as a vanguard against Islam. In the West, anti-Semitism is more anti-State of Israel, pro-Palestine sentiment. But it isn't so strong that the Western governments have dropped their support for Israel. Libya's civil war ended up fracturing the government between two authoritarian governments, with the East being somewhat more secular than the West, and a Tuareg state in the middle of the desert. Nigeria is the rising power in West Africa, and its population has exploded. Darfur is finally free of Sudanese rule, although the Sudanese still send armed raiders past the border to screw with them. Ethiopia has improved drastically, and is one of the richest countries in East Africa. The Somalian state may have lost Puntland and Somaliland, But at least it has a government again. Ironically enough, many American anarcho-capitalists moved to Somalia, and even more ironically, have become advisors to its government. To the surprise of just about everybody, the Islamic Republic of Iran instituted reforms during the 2020s, and has turned back a lot of the religious laws in the state. It is now a modern, largely democratic, largely secular state, where the Ayatollahs have very little power. Pakistan, on the other hand, has gone full Islamic fundamentalist, and its instability and growing nuclear arsenal have made it the new North Korea. The old North Korea had long since perished, when Kim Jong-un disappeared in 2028 and a civil war broke out. The Chinese and South Koreans moved in. The modern Republic of Korea is now pretty much a Chinese puppet. However, Japan stayed on with the Americans, and concern over Chinese militarization has led to constitutional reforms and an American approval for a new Japanese military. With the Communist Party gone, Xi Jinping promising further reforms, and the KMT coming back into power, the Republic of China joined the PRC under a one country, two systems agreement. The Taiwanese independence movement did not disappear, and is in fact growing, since the promised reforms have not come about. While the rest of East Asia becomes pro-Chinese, Vietnam ironically holds out as the most pro-American state. The Philippines' relationship with the United States deteriorated during the Clinton presidency, and after an attempted American-backed coup against Duterte, the Philippines went all the way for China. This has been a Persephone Foundation Timeline Reading. Thank you for listening.